Here, welcome back all the regulars. So we had planned to speak about receiving feedback this week. Last week we taught all about how to give feedback, or actually how to not give feedback. So we were going to teach that this week, but in true style of our kind of agile thinking, we found something else we thought would be more important this week, given we continue to receive in the last few weeks in LIP a lot of questions from the audience about how to actually set up an organization, your team, for receiving, giving feedback, coaching, kind of a broader discussion, or a bigger sort of zooming out discussion about how to set up an environment for feedback and coaching and decision making. Like, how do you kind of do some of the things that we're teaching more on an individual level, how to not give feedback, how to give it, as opposed to how to set up an environment, set up a team, set up an organization to do that. So today we decided, let's dip into that. The point that we want to make, and we just have a few slides to outline this, we'll have some time for Q&A, is that it's going to be dependent on how to do that on where your company is, where you are, and sort of this notion of diagnosing where you are today before you figure out what to do. So we're going to kind of do the diagnosis before you can prescribe how to set that up. And we're going to take you through the top 2 indicators so you have a sense of what to look for. What are the indicators of a low-performing team? What are the indicators of high-performing teams? And walk you through what we've found over, the last over a decade plus, looking at a lot of organizations, what those 2 things are. So that will help inform kind of what to do next. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Hopefully that's okay.
And I saw quickly that Jim from Home Depot, yes, the presentation from Glenn Gaffney, the CAA, former deputy director, available at 1 o'clock. You can, I think, walk-ins probably, there's still space in there to be able to hear him speak. Just a quick story before I forget, it was funny, so the CAA spent a lot of time coming in and observing our practices of how we mentor and coach individuals, how we recruit and how we hire. And so, when we do our hiring, and we have some of our new hires joining during the session here, can you imagine in our hiring, we call Super Saturday, a few thousand candidates funnel through, usually up from 4,000 to 5,000 down to the top 50 for a full hiring day, once in the fall in New York, and then in the spring in our Boston office. And then London runs their separate sessions. But as these 50 candidates are being interviewed in a 10-hour day, we have guests who come in and observe how we hire, interview, question. And so imagine sitting in your interview as a college student, right? And you see a middle-aged man sitting there with a name tag that says Deputy Director of the CIA, listening in on your interview. And you're, of course, thinking like what is this? Am I in trouble? It just added a lot of stress. But it was funny in the end, I think, from our side at least. The candidates seemed to make it through.
Once it started happening, we're like, wait a second, this could be, well, they say the truth comes out under stress. So the candidates that we hired in that window I have to look back, were they the most excellent hires we should probably take a look. But it's possible
either Glenn made great candidates or the worst. Yeah. I'm not quite sure. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take you through a couple things. So you should be able to see me broadcast here. Give me a second, let's see if it works. All right. And I wanted to start off first talking about just a recent article someone sent me. It's actually one of our employees sent us to me, and this is fairly recent, July 24th in the Wall Street Journal. And I'll talk about how it's relevant to the topic here, but how companies who for the last several months have raved about working from home has been amazing, right? A lot of companies have not even said, we'll do it permanently, to we'll do it till maybe mid-July next year, definitely till end of the year. And so a lot of companies have said the productivity levels of working from home has been like almost to a surprise for the senior leadership, that there wasn't a blip in productivity. Well, now we are 5 months into working from home, and most things, the honeymoon period for most things ends at around month 6. We are around a month away from month 6, and the cracks are starting to show up that remote work isn't so great after all. There is a part of fatigue setting in, stress and anxiety building in, but one of the interesting things the article talked about was the rate of learning is significantly slower when working from home. And so the big concern has been on new hires, right? How do you integrate new hires? When they're working in the office, you don't and can't appreciate how much over the shoulder and kind of non-scheduled interactions accelerate their learning. how do you onboard? How do you train? How do you learn? This article talks about how projects that should have taken 1 hour now take 1 day. Things are moving slower. And so I'll talk about some of these traits on this. And then I sent this article just before this meeting to our new landlords. We're moving offices, building new space. Vornado is the largest landlord in New York City. And so sent them this note, and I want to focus your attention kind of in the middle of the note here, which I can give you a second to read the note if you want, but I'll give you a second to read the notes. Kevin, can you give me a thumbs up once you're done reading it so I know that? I'm going to assume you guys read this. The punchline I put in is that I think the real most important reasons for an office still hasn't really been discovered yet or talked about in depth, which has to do with creativity. And think of creativity as advancing strategic initiatives, strategic thinking. The challenge on video conference is that everything has to be scheduled. There's much less of an impromptu. When we did a lot of work with Zappos as well with Tony Hsieh, the key insight he had was what he called serendipitous collisions. That they deliberately set up the office that more collisions would occur between people. And this, of course, matters most at the senior levels, people who actually are in charge of strategy. The more ownership you have in strategy, the more important it is to be able to have those breakthroughs, those innovative thoughts that have never been tried, but gives you a shortcut, a significant leap up from what you're doing. And a physical office provides the setup of that unscheduled, messy process of getting breakthroughs occurring in teams that a scheduled meeting does not do. It's almost like, okay, so Carla, I will call you at 2 o'clock Eastern time, and for the next hour, we will have breakthrough thinking. Mm-hmm. We will advance our strategy in that 1 hour and be creative, right?
It's creativity time, let's do it. Yeah.
There's a funny German commercial about Germans know how to have fun. And they're like, we will have fun now, right? There's a notion that there are certain things that
we will have a breakthrough now.
Right, breakthrough now. We will have fun now, right? Team, fun now. Like you can't do certain things in a scheduled manner. And that unscheduled serendipitous collision is required to advance strategy, to advance creativity.
So for instance, at Zappos, just as a for instance, they'll have men and women's bathrooms on different floors to force you to have to walk up the stairs, or they'll have drinks on one floor and the snacks on the other floor, certain sodas or certain drinks at different floors. So you have to go upstairs for kombucha, but downstairs for water. I mean, they literally find a way to force collision. Even though it might feel, what's the word? Not like a pain in the ass. That's a good one. It actually is forcing that. I mean, it's crazy what they'll go to, but that's very strategic, right?
And then the second part around rigor and discipline. And so once again, these themes, I think over time will come up a lot. Rigor and discipline, the idea that willpower, we read something, we see a talk. How many times have we made that New Year's resolution type promise of that's it, I got it, I will make change. And it fails us. Willpower is such a weak muscle. It fails most of us. And rigor and discipline occurs stronger in teams. When teams work together, the idea of a company and the idea of having a hub, a physical hub that allows good behaviors to occur more easily and bad behaviors hard to do. The example we always use from our physical office is if you want to eat healthy here, it's really easy. It's all around you now. We're not in the office yet, but usually bowls of healthy snacks everywhere, drinks, it's like healthy and even having beverage and water everywhere. But if you wanted to actually eat unhealthy, say I wanted a Twix bar or a Snickers bar.
Or a Shake Shack burger.
Or Shake Shack burger, which we did the other day, but that happens by, you break sometimes.
I broke.
Yes.
I've been a vegetarian for the last 20 weeks.
But
accidentally. Okay, sorry.
We digress a little bit. So when we say want a Snickers bar, I have to go find my wallet. I have to now walk outside the office and I have to go buy this Snickers bar and probably not eat it in front of another next jumper because they might look at me kind of like oddly because we're generally used to eating healthier snacks. Like it just takes more work.
Right.
And so the willpower required or the effort required to go eat unhealthy makes me not do it. And the other one is so easy. Now I'm talking about something physical, but rigor and discipline starts to get a lot more complicated and more important when we move to the mind. We talked in one of our earlier LIP classes about hard work versus smart work. The difference between the industrial age and the information age, the 20th century versus the 21st century, headcount came from the 20th century. We were literally just headcount. We were the same as a widget. The most important assets were how much money you had, capital, and the machinery. And human beings are fairly replaceable, and the strategy was set atop, and everyone's job is to go and do the hard work to execute on the judgment calls, the strategy made by very few senior people. The difference in the 21st century is that the human brain, as in the idea of working smarter, it is your number one competitive advantage. It's your assets. And you see and find companies with literally 2 to 6 people now doing what companies of 10,000 to 50,000 employees cannot accomplish. Technology information has allowed us to leverage human brains at a level that never could before. And so when you think about creativity, which of course is a mental thing, it's not as much a physical thing, although you might think about Play-Doh and whatnot, but it's really about the mind, rigor and discipline. I want you to put that mindset into not the hard work stuff, not the physical stuff, not the body, but the mind. And so we'll spend a little more time kind of going to this. We get a lot of notes, and the reason we changed the topic on this was because of feedback and comments from last session. So we still have the feedback receiving, which we'll do another session, but this is a note we received. It's a former officer from the Air Force who now is the head of a business school. CNM is Charlie and Megan. And was just talking, I'll give you a chance to read this really quick, just to, Kevin, again, tell me thumbs up when you've done reading it.
Poor Kevin. This is what happens to new hires.
I'm assuming he's an average speed reader. He could be fast, he's a smart one. So.
It's interesting, somebody just said too, we're not working from home, we're living at work. That's exactly what it is, right? We're living at work.
I'm going to emphasize this athletic performance approach versus workplace therapy approach. We talked about feedback giving last week. Some of you may have come and observed our 10X, which is a live coaching session. And the first response when people see what we did was, that's not the kind of coaching I've been trained to do. The idea of coaching has been all around this workplace therapy approach. My job is to ask you questions and help you self-discover your way onto your challenges. Self-discover your way, self-awareness. I'm simply here as a workplace therapist to help you get to your own self-conclusion of challenges and issues, not to give you my assessment. My assessment of the problem, my assessment of maybe ways to improve. The athletic performance approach is different. And this idea that he talks about is this workplace athlete. And talk about this because although when you think about coaching someone, we are trained to do that self-discovery methodology, ask a lot of questions, give them the space and time. Think about our actual interaction with subordinates. We don't have that type of discipline, patience to ask questions. It's like, what are you doing? You're trying to get to the information, to the punchlines really fast, right? Oftentimes, we've now picked up this acronym from the military. They call it BLUF. BLUF stands for bottom line up front. Someone comes in and they're like, can I get some of your time? And you're like, can you give me the bluff? right? Even before you want to meet with me, give me the bluff. We want to get to the points because we are not in an amateur intramural, take your time sport. We are in the game is happening right now. Performance matters. And I share this because there's an interesting notion and kind of why I share this idea of this individual. I had no idea actually he is a weightlifter, 10,000 lifts, and mentions that, what Megan and I have been able to do is we have cataloged 10,000 workplace struggles. There's two aspects when I think about this. We have seen in excess, easily in excess of 10,000 workplace struggles in all types of companies. I mean, said another way, we have really seen so many different ways it is done wrong. And then we have actually seen the common patterns of those struggles. But we have also witnessed hundreds of the right ways, amazing innovations. 10,000 wrong ways, hundreds of right ways. And I'm sharing this because it will help give some of the context where I think the question from last session and feedback was, how do I get my company build a culture where they will candid feedback? I mean, how do I go from where it is to, like help me, give me a solution. And one of the things that people fail to do more is before you solve something, you have to properly diagnose what the problem is and where you are on the spectrum, right? Most things fall in some spectrum. The idea that awareness comes before action. And we're very fast to want to act, but you need to get aware. And when you get situational awareness, when you get self-awareness and awareness, you're able to properly diagnose and then figure out what to do. And there's a range of it. So I'm mentioning this because this is just a sample. When I mentioned hundreds of right ways, I'll give you one of the stories from this. This is a sample, whether it's top neuroscientists, professional sports, we have Olympic sports teams, professional sports teams.
These are the different industries and organizations we've spent the last over 10 years plus observing how they work, what they do, how their teamwork, how they do teamwork, collaboration, setup. I mean, literally observing on the ground a lot of these organizations, what they do. I mean, social services, I think Daniela, for some of you who've seen, she's been teaching in COA as well, around human behavior and helping cure autism, to Dr. Gorman. He's a chiropractor by trade, and so how he creates physical balance, to then we work with emotional balance with him. And there's some really cool stuff that we've observed.
And this is a slide from a little further back. So we, of course, have left out two of the best areas we've sent. I mean, many, many lessons, both the Air Force as well as the Navy, going into specific instances. We've had privileged access. And so this is an example of 10 of the hundreds that we have seen things done well. We've observed reformed prisoners turn into entrepreneurs and the process of how they did that. And so really cool things that we spend time. But I want to spend time talking a little bit more about this individual. His name is Dr. Jim Fadigan. So he invented the Cookie Monster.
The Sesame Street characters of Big Bird and the Cookie Monster.
Right, and probably several others as well. Yeah. But it was fascinating kind of what he did. And he explained, for example, the idea behind Cookie Monster is kids are scared of monsters, but they love cookies. When you combine cookie and monster, you end up having to change the mind and the narrative and view of Cookie Monster. So Jim Fadigan is one of the top brain doctors, neuroscientists in the world. He's actually quite old right now. He's 80 something years old. We spent a lot of time with him, and he sought us out because he had discovered some cool things, and he was scared to pass and leave planet Earth not being able to spread the knowledge that he discovered. And he has a fascinating background of what he has done, building the learning and development centers for huge organizations, Fortune 500 companies. But he, years back, also used to be a gymnast. He was a gymnastics coach.
He was like an Olympic gymnast.
Yeah, like 7 Olympic athletes. Yeah. Right? So, I mean, like, you think about, like, wow, what a diverse background. Brain doctor, like all that stuff. Well, his last gig was actually helping children who had fallen off the curve in learning and development. So they have fallen behind in grades. And in the state of Florida, they ran an experiment with around 100 schools. And he got 15,000 children to jump a full grade in 6 to 12 months.
It's a program he called Learn to Learn, right?
15,000 children who were falling behind grade to jump a full grade in 6 to 12 months. I mean, that's like pretty cool stuff, right? Not only large numbers, you're going to like neighborhoods that don't have all the resources, and he's actually able to make this kind of progress. So he walked us through the details of how he did that. And he talked about the human brain is wired in 2 ways. One is we have a desire to learn and grow, right? Like, in fact, living is learning and growing. And when you're not, right, like that's not living. But there's a contradictory part of the human brain, which is it fights to help you survive.
Protect.
Right? The protection side. And so, and that notion of fear and, you know, the fight or flight comes when we're scared. Those 2 things can oppose each other because to grow is scary. You have to go into the uncomfortable, go into difficulty and push harder on it. But that very thing triggers that amygdala and the whole aspect of the brain that makes you want to protect yourself. And so as a result of it, the top reason people do not really, you know, learn, you know, and advance on their brain is because they're in their heads. The way I describe it, you know, when your palms start to get sweaty, you start to feel your heartbeat in your ears, you can hear your own voice, right? That echo, like I can hear myself speaking and palms are getting sweaty. Those are just physical manifestations of your brain.
Yeah, just shutting down.
Scared in fight or flight mode, and having fear. And so think about topics like math. I don't know who loves math, but maybe some of you don't. It makes you nervous. You know, this one for a while was, sorry, start out. But I had the same thing on English. Like, you know, like every English class, I'm like, I can't score beyond a B is what I always felt. Like, you know, it might be public speaking, but usually reading, writing, math. I mean, there are certain key academic topics that are scored and kids don't do well. So he built a program, and the program is very simply like this. He's coaching you for no more than twice a week on one of those topics that really you struggle with, right? And you know how people say in your brain, I'm not good at math. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. And that is, of course, the beginnings of now the other side of the brain, the fear, the side of protective. You know, when you say that, it's so that no one expects you to have to do it well, because you're kind of like declaring losing before you've lost. So when you lose, you're like, well, I kind of predicted it, right? I forecasted losing, as opposed to being surprised, not only for yourself, to protect yourself from others. But anyways, so what he did was this. He would grill them on your typical what happens in class on either reading, you know, writing or math. But he would have them stand on a balance beam while this academic grilling was going on. Now, you know, most of us can't stand on a balance beam, but so there's versions, if you look at gymnasts, how they train, it's pretty much on the floor. It's like a cushion.
So you can't actually get hurt.
So when you fall, you're falling like 6 inches, right? But it still has the same type of wobbliness of balancing. And he would have you answer math questions while walking forward in the balance beam, then start to walk backwards. Then he would have you walk forward, eyes closed, walk backwards, eyes closed, while answering math questions. And this act of doing this twice a week, the program lasted around 16 weeks, but he said somewhere in the middle of it, you'll see a breakthrough where they start to do better in math, and it will show up in class. And the entire premise of it, and that's counterintuitive to think about, how when you want to get good at something that scares you, you have to double the stress. Now, the person in Fadigan's classroom is training, worrying about physical balance while trying to do math. But when they go to school, they don't put you in a balance beam. And suddenly what used to make your hands sweaty, you know, you can hear your voice, it was easier because the balance beam wasn't there. They're trained under higher forms, what we call 2x the stress.
Think about swimmers. I think swimmers in training, right? The drag, right? Mm-hmm. They will put extra weight on you so that when you actually are competing and you don't have that weight, it just feels easier, right? It's exactly the same notion.
So he used the balance beam and the physical part to double the stress, that when you went to class, suddenly it felt easier. And the kids couldn't explain why I can do math well. Well, the number one thing, which is your own terrorist telling you, you suck and I can't do this, right? Like they couldn't understand why it felt easier. It was because they had 1x the stress, not 2x. Now, I share this story because you'll see the relevance in it. It's a cool story of itself, but there is some relevance to this.
We'll tell you how it translates to the topic here. in a second. We're just dragging it out for the suspense.
And when you say we, I think Megan's trying to, that's code for speed up, Charlie.
You are dragging this out,
yes.
but we're going to get there.
So 10,000 different ways it's done wrong. Hundreds of ways it's done right. I don't know if you've heard of the term, the 80-20 rule, right? They say that you can't really find signal when you look at everything, so you go 80-20. Well, in most things in life, you'll see you have to apply 80-20 twice. 80% of 20% is 4%. The difference of looking at the top 4% versus the bottom 4% is very illuminating. And the title of this talk that we labeled was, what are the top two indicators, the common traits that show up when we looked at the bottom 4% of companies, of teams, and then what are the top two indicators at the top 4%? And there's a mirror aspect of it. So I'm going to share with you what we saw. At the very bottom, this is what showed up. Should I do it in red?
Yeah.
Okay. Bottom performing teams had everyone, generally speaking, everyone is walking on eggshells.
Yeah, you know, when you feel like you have to tiptoe around people, you can't say what you're really thinking. You feel other people aren't saying what they're really thinking. It feels delicate. It feels dangerous. It feels unsafe.
And the second common trait was this: nobody is corrected. When I say nobody is corrected, generally speaking, they're either fragile or they're hostile. They'll retaliate. And what you find that's common is this: the only form of correction is a formalized write-up or an annual review, or a heavy reliance in rules and compliance. If you don't want something to happen, you try to get the organization to write a rule, right?
More policies. Right?
Policies, you know, compliance, training programs. The idea that when someone does something that is what we call, remember NQR, not quite right, that you wouldn't correct them in real time. So on the flip side, when we looked at what were the common traits that showed up in organizations that were very successful, at the best of the best, number one was information flow. Information flow, and it occurred with speed. Information traveled so fast, it felt like a hive. You can talk about beehives, right? Or you think about Star Trek, Klingon, right? I mean, all the hive notion that information travels almost seamlessly as if they're one entity, despite the fact that different people. Information flow being very fast. And the second one, and this is subtle but important, is that almost every, sorry, I wrote this wrong. Almost wrote
bettering.
You can tell I'm like a desire of a hamburger. I almost wrote beef, but
bettering judgment. So the top two, so it's information flow and with speed. And then the second one we found is that the majority of people, and we can get into the nuances of this, but especially at the top, is training to better their judgment, right? Improving their judgment. Judgment training, judgment improvement. They're constantly training on how to improve their judgment.
I don't know if you can see the similarities. It's almost like the two sides of a coin, the kind of mirroring aspect of these two. So everyone is walking on eggshells. Typically in research, they call that organizational silence. The number one thing showing up in most companies when they study them is what they call organizational silence. People do not speak up. They say silence is the number one form of hostility today. And I think I always use the example, if you ever go to an uncomfortable dinner party, it's so quiet you can hear the fork clanking the plate. That deafening silence where you just better not talk about it, right? It's like easier to be quiet. On the flip side, information flow at speed. People think about, oh, well, we have like dashboards and we have data and like a lot of analytics. It's not that. There is nothing faster when it comes to information and navigating uncertainty than the human brain. And it's what Daniel Kahneman of research called System 1. It's our intuition, the visceral, fast aspect of sharing intuition. And when intuition shuts down, what shows up only is system 2, the logical and analytical brain. And another way for intuition simply is voice. What is the level of voice in an organization? Is it showing up fast or not? A great litmus test simply is this. When you have a meeting, right? What does voice look like in the meeting? Is it generally the leader speaking only, or only the scheduled people speaking? And then the discussion only occurring from the same few people all the time, right? I think we all know. You know, we have some of those kiss asses in the meeting who always kind of have to have the kiss ass comments. We have the critical ones in the meeting who always have to throw in the snarky critical comment.
Or the one who always has to have, you know, those jokes and the things that people say in meetings all the time. You know, we're going to pound the fist on, what do they, slap the table on this one? Like all those phrases. Ugh, it's so gross. It's like they have phrases they use just to interject.
Or is it a meeting where it's discussion? It's messy. It's interesting, even in our company, we stepped in yesterday to this game Zoom. Like new hires were in there was like about 17 people just playing games. And it's like, unlike most Zooms look like this, right? Few people are speaking, the rest of you might as well have duct tape taped to your mouth because you're here to listen and you're muzzled. In the game thing, it's like everyone was speaking, throwing different terms and stuff. And then like, there's a sense of buzz.
Yeah.
There's a sense of discussion. Like you go to a restaurant, you know, any bar that's hot, it's noisy, the buzz, and we crave that. I think probably more now work from home and without I think we crave that buzz because we know that's healthy. The unhealthy is you walk in, it's eerily quiet. So you feel you have to be more quiet. Everyone's whispering. That notion of silence is hostility, the idea of buzz. And so even on the feedback that we shared, feedback, of course, falls in there. Why feedback gets talked about a lot. Feedback is a form of crushing eggshells. When you have people speaking and sharing information, feedback is usually what it's called, right? Managers call it feedback. People just call it reaction, right? Like they're sharing intuition. And that is, once again, the sign of the best of the best had information flow at speed, and the worst of the worst, everyone was walking in eggshells. But the other part, right, nobody corrected versus bettering judgment. What's interesting about nobody corrected, a litmus test is this. If you find yourself counting people out, lowering expectations of what they can do. And a common phrase, and I just heard this from some of the managers, was this: we can only do one thing. We can't do more than one thing at a time, right? And that one thing is only what I can get done. Like you need if it isn't you driving it as the leader, it doesn't get done. That notion of it, you don't want to say it, but almost would be faster and easier with me just working. The idea that the judgment call, that decision really is just me and the brain, and everyone else acts as limbs. Meaning they're not here to use their brain, they're here to execute on my judgment, execute on my decision. That, by the way, is how industrial age worked. Every employee, generally speaking, headcount, was a limb, right, for the brains of the management. They had the judgment call, everyone else acted as limbs. When organizations are in the top 4%, that's not what happens. And it's interesting because it's not just that doesn't happen. They're bettering judgment, and bettering judgment matters most at the top 2 levels of the organization. The top 2 levels, so even if you look at a team, the top person and 1 level below is where it matters most. And the interesting nuance of how to better judgment is actually teaching it. And the teachers in the group will probably know this. It's counterintuitive to think. There's 2 forms of teaching. There's a form of teaching where I want to win as much praise and adoration and success from the audience's point of view. There's another form of teaching, which is, it's the highest and fastest, most effective way to learn something. Teaching what you want to learn is what we call an investment in loss. It is the most cutting edge form of teaching. And so if you want a better judgment, you need to be teaching judgment. You need to be coaching somebody else in judgment and training.
You know what's interesting about the Fadigan example that Charlie shared with the physical stress so that kids can learn how to better do writing and reading and math, physical stress of being on a balance beam and the balance that they have to have physically. And so if you think about what that is, what we're talking about, the parallel here is that if the most stressful thing and you want what you want to learn in the case of the kids, if they want to learn math, what you want to learn as a leader is better judgment. Well, the stress, instead of putting physical stress on you, it's actually teaching others, right? Teaching others.
But teaching, especially in front of
others, is very stressful.
I mean, can you imagine the last time you try to coach one of your subordinates do better, to improve their judgment, which is kind of teaching someone to fish versus giving them fish, right? If I give you my judgment, hey, just go do this, that's giving them fish.
Because now what's happening is you're putting your judgment out there, right? Now your judgment can be criticized. That's why it's scary. That's why it's hard, but that's how you learn.
But imagine coaching the individual, teaching them to fish while others are observing.
Yeah, teaching how to fish while others are observing.
Simply put, an audience is that 2x stress. The Fadigan balance beam to teach someone math, reading, and writing. Learn to coach someone with an audience watching and observing you. Maybe even able to give you feedback anonymously through the process.
Well, this is why, and you
2x the stress.
We're Harvard had years ago said we are a DDO, so they call it deliberately developmental organizations, right? So everybody that comes to Next Jump and these wants to grow and develop. And if we ever asked our employees who here wants to grow and get better and develop, everybody raised their hand. But if you then said who wants to do that in front of others, it's like, whoa, I kind of want to do that in private. Can we have a private conversation over here? Can we talk about that separately? Can you send me an email? To develop in front of others is 10 times harder. It is so much harder. But if you can do that, you go faster, which is why, last week we ran a 10X for some of you who went. The people who decided and volunteered, who put themselves in that seat will grow faster than others, period. Because being in that seat, and actually putting yourself out there in front of others and putting your judgment out and your thinking and where you are in your life and your career, and then we as coaches and judges in front of hundreds of people, our judgment is now being judged in front of others. It is so stressful. I mean, it's the equivalent of the kids who are on a physical balance beam while somebody's asking them math questions. It's like, what? It just feels, you're sweating physically, emotionally, mentally. It's tough, but that's the faster way to develop that muscle, right? Of math in this case.
Yeah. So simply put, think of how most of us train judgment. I call it half stress, right? It's kind of like, oh, I'm in a workshop and I'm getting training on this. That's the half stress. Because once you go into the real life, you'll see you can't conjure up what you're supposed to do. When you do it at 2 times stress, right? This is the training. When you go to real life, it feels easier because you're trained with an audience that is doubling the level of stress. I think I just have one last slide here, right? Actually,
can we read that?
Yeah. So there was a great quote we got from the Green Berets. It's the special forces in the Army. That it's a great example of this. They say they're highly competent. As a result, they teach others, but that teaching forces them to be even more competent, and so it becomes a virtuous cycle. This act of teaching what you want to get better at
makes you more competent.
And literally the 21st century, the power cell, the very nucleus of what makes a human being more valuable today than ever before, the number one asset is judgment. Once you remove judgment, right, you will see that you're going back to an industrial age human being, industrial age head count. And the capacity of an organization or a team either is growing or shrinking by the level of judgment getting better or just not. Because when it's not, it's like not using your brain, it atrophies. We're having this fun conversation, not fun, but coaching conversation yesterday, and one of our leaders said, you know what? I miss being micromanaged because it's addicting.
So I kind of liked
it.
Right?
I kind of liked it, right? There was a part where I was productive with specific directions and it feels good. But then I asked them the question, but you know what happens? Although it's productive and feels good in the short run, guess who gets promoted? And guess who doesn't? The person who gets promoted to take more responsibility is the one whose judgment is trending up. Like it's like fantasy sports. If you ever play those games, it's like who you trade is the one, that's stuck, not moving. Trending up players are the ones you keep. That's how you win. So I leave you with just one last slide because we saw this week and thought it was so funny, right?
I thought this was a riot. It's a sailboat that almost sunk because those are actually 2 seals. At first I thought it was just one. I'm not sure where this is. I forgot to look back, but there's 2 seals on this boat.
Right. So 2 just giant seals on this boat.
This thing.
And so imagine if you are in a sailboat race, right? And you're trying to win the race with 2 seals on your boat. One seal is called everyone is walking on eggshells. And the other seal is called nobody is corrected. And we were talking that, people have different narratives.
Like there's 2 kinds of people, and just in general in life, you can either put yourself in one of these 2 buckets, where some people will say, what seal? I don't know what you're talking about. What seal? And then the other person will say, well, I see it, but we have to keep going. Like,
we don't have time to talk about
We don't have time to talk about that. Like, we have to keep moving, right? We have to keep sailing. Let's go. We have somewhere we need to get to. You're either ignoring it or you're just acting like it's not even there. I think about that, like the emotional baggage we all have, right? And what makes you not be able to think and use your brain is because you're walking around, people say a backpack on, but it's like, feels like 2 seals sinking you, but you're trying to operate as if it's not there. Denying it's there, ignoring that it's there, it's all the same. It's just really bad. And that's not going to create good judgment.
And once again, I know we want solutions. We want to know how to fix it. But the challenge I'll put to this group, even for the next week until we meet again, is this. I want you to go out there now with this in mind, because your team, your organization falls somewhere in the spectrum, right?
Yes.
Of extreme end, being the worst of the worst, everyone's walking on eggshells and almost, every difficult topic, right? Versus information flow at speed, nobody's corrected, versus you're seeing judgment being bettered. And so being aware and now looking through the lens of these 2, and I always find the problem is actually easier to start with, to get awareness, than the solutions. And we get so solution oriented, just go through and look for your 2 seals and start to notice the nuances of them. We're talking about even the first article about not being in physical offices, right? Why show that article in this? Because everyone would say, well, we're not in offices, so what's the point of this? Well, so what can we do when we're working from home, virtually, not in offices? Well, first you have to be aware of what exactly are the things missing.
Yeah.
When you start to recognize specific parts down to even who, you will start to solve it better. Identifying a problem at that level of depth is typically how you get to the best solutions.
Now, I will tell you, because it's so painful to leave you hanging like that, I think we'll talk about this next week. It's so hard for us not to go into a grid and a mesh of different strategies, because it's not just one thing that you're going to have to do to fix this. If you're really at the extreme, or you feel like there's like no trust, very low voice, everybody's walking on eggshells, people aren't corrected, people are fragile or hostile, then there's going to be a spectrum. But there's a lot of different solutions meshed together. But figuring out what to do first is really important, right? Sequence is really important where you start. There's a lot of things that will be precursors to getting into how you create feedback, and depending on how bad it is or kind of where you're on the spectrum. But the answers will lie in, there's a lot of work to do on self, and then work to do as team, because many things that need to be done in team need to be set up. So I think we'll go through next week and share more.
So really quick, maybe take 30 seconds. I want to know what's going through your head, what's on your mind now. If you can type it into the chat, and then Monica, I know the images, I'll tweet it on my Twitter account with the images directly after this, and get the images after.
Just punch in questions, thoughts on your mind.
Valerie, if you're here, can you unmute and ask your question? I think you were one of the earlier questions here.
In Boston.
Hey there, I'm here. So I have a situation where I have a leader who is kind of struggling with coaching, and two very different team members essentially. One is kind of more technical in nature, and the other is more kind of business centric and client facing, I guess is a good way to think about it. And what I'm seeing is that the leader is kind of coaching them very differently, and one of them is a very positive relationship and the other has turned into a very negative relationship where the feedback is, I would say, no longer healthy or no longer coaching, if you will. It's truly just become frustration, I think, at this point, because the individual doesn't have the skills yet that they really need for the job that they're in. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, how to maybe take some corrective action.
So I'll give you a couple quick thoughts that's interesting. We did a lot of work with public schools and principals on this, and shared this in one of the earlier LIP classes. Make sure, in general, usually the most valuable energy and time for individuals in the morning to early afternoon. Later in the afternoon, our energy is kind of more beat.
So you'll be more frustrated, right? In general.
But what happens is the squeaky wheel gets our best energy. And so it's sometimes more effective, first just as an overall productivity, to spend more time coaching and helping the individual they're having positive interactions with in the morning. Save the negative one for the afternoon. Okay. And it sounds counterintuitive, but there's a part where oftentimes the frustrating conversations get circular, you waste your energy, it becomes a vicious cycle because now I'm in a bad mood and that makes it worse and worse. So that subtle shift first just can overall just raise productivity as a team and organization. Then going into, and also, by the way, once you've had positive interactions first, baked in your day, we tend to also be more patient and better, right? And in the negative interaction. Now, in the negative interaction, the key that occurs when someone is kind of snippy in their feedback, it's usually what we call baggage. Baggage is undealt with and unprocessed emotions, meaning it's not the issue at hand, it's the accumulation of the little cuts that occurred that I didn't address. I used to have this growing up with my parents a lot. My mom would be like, let me now give you a lesson on the last 3 months of issues I want to bring up, as well as 5 years ago. And like, we do this without recognizing, but the receiver of it is like hit and kind of caught off guard because they're like, I literally just spilled a little milk on the ground. And I don't understand why I'm being lectured about irresponsibility, right? But it's an accumulation, and this is the nature of the, information flow at speed, as in near real-time feedback reactions kind of generally prevent that, but we tend not to, right? We tend to bottle it up and it's too small to bring up, too small to bring up. But by the time we bring it up, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, I was going to, Valerie, when you mentioned the frustration. So a few weeks ago, Charlie and I taught the connection between frustration and expectation. So it's interesting because we ended up teaching a lot. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but we ended up talking a lot about the differences of insecure leaders versus more on the arrogant leaders, how they will handle. So when you just said she's frustrated, or he's frustrated with this individual, there's one simple process that we came up with, and I've realized this by working with somebody that is more on the getting frustrated side. This one is to actually help them vent it out prior to a coaching session. Like truly go there, as in all the frustration where you just want to pull your hair out because they're driving you crazy. And I think, it can feel like, well, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't talk about people behind their back. You should have that discussion one-on-one and in person with them. That's not true, right? Because you've got your own baggage, you've got other stuff maybe mixed into it. Maybe you're carrying baggage from the night before or something else that happened to you. It's to let it all out to another human being. You don't have to solve it. I don't know if this leader has somebody to do that with, but maybe you can be that person. Like, it's just to let them be human and let it out. Because I've seen so many times where I feel Charlie is just so frustrated with somebody. I'm thinking, oh dear God, this session is going to be really bad. But I hear it all. So then I go into the meeting thinking, oh, if that came out here, but then it's always better, right? It always comes out tempered. And it's not to say you're coddling them in any way and that you don't need to address some of those issues that are driving you. But when you bring them up, it just comes out calmer. It's healthier. Like you said, it's no longer healthy. It's just healthier. You can think straight. It's a conversation. It's amazing how just getting that out first. So I don't know if that helps, Valerie.
I can't tell you how important this is. We talked about the slight differences in coaching as an insecure versus arrogant. And it's fascinating because the best way to put it is you have to burn off your emotions. Someone who has that kind of, sort of arrogance or anger is not really good even at hearing the term vulnerability. That just sounds weak. But if you say burn off your emotions, I'm like, oh, I'd like to do that. I'd like to do that. Well, that's being vulnerable, but it's actually called burn off your emotions. The military folks you work with, they love burn off your emotions. I like to do that. And the way I look at it, if you ever make s'mores, right? I don't know if you ever make s'mores and you're trying to make a little fire or a campfire, you need it to turn into hot coals. It's not good to make s'mores typically on raging flame. So how do you accelerate it turning into coal, which is still hot? One way to do it is to pour gasoline on it. That's the notion of burning off your emotions. You accelerate the burning of the flame, and so then it will go boom, and then it will stay as hot coals. Now go coach. What tends to occur by accident, to Megan's point, we go in, right? And it's crazy because we know we do this repeatedly.
Sometimes I'm like, oh God, you just worked me up to it. I'm like, I'm now in a panic if this actually can't. It's always better. It's happened for years.
Because I burned off my emotions. I burned off my raging flame. So I go in, I'm still.
It doesn't do good things to me, I'll be honest.
But it's a lot better.
But it's better on me than on the person who was going to go to. So
this is the idea. We talked about a TP, a training partner. You need someone at your level.
Yeah, somebody at your level.
That you can burn off your emotions prior to going and doing that coaching session. And when you burn it off, like I said, try to make s'mores. I need that thing to turn into coal fast because kids are very impatient. They want the s'mores right away. Well, I need that thing to rage them. So do it with another human being. Rage your burning off your emotions. Then as hot coal, you can still be tough, but you won't lose your emotional cool when you do that.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
I think Chris from Houston had a good question. You want to unmute, Chris? Or it's not even a question, but it's a point. Is he here?
I'm here. It wasn't necessarily a question. It really was just a statement that I found and experienced that the longer you spend ignoring or avoiding those people and walking on eggshells, as you guys said, the worse it gets and the harder it is to recover from it. So once you recognize that you're there or your team is there, you've got to get out of that position as quick as you can.
So there's I brought this up. There's a couple interesting insights here. One is the first thing that occurs, and it's a term the military used, they call it calm out. You're cut out of the communications, right? We tend to informate, as in mate the people that we value, their judgment, you almost err on informating those that you believe add value. Like, I want your thinking, I want your thoughts, good judgment. We do the opposite to those. We calm them out.
You just stop sharing information with them, right? You don't want to give them anything.
It seems like a waste of time. And in fact, if I share information, they might do more damage, right? So you calm them out versus you'll see there's a level of you know what? Hey, I don't know if this is relevant to you, but I just want you to know this is happening, right? In many ways, when we talked about doubling the stress, the coaching, one way we describe it is thinking out loud. It's being able to think and process your thoughts in front of others. Right? We do that with those that we, want them to react to my thinking, right? I share everything unfiltered. And then those who we think less of, right? Lower expectations, we don't even bother, right? They get silence. So just to recognize that piece. The other part is this. There are two other points real quick. There's usually more than one person who's in that bottom. And the single most detrimental thing is they think they're the only ones. When you think you are the only one who is a detriment to the team, who holds a team back, not contributing at the bottom, it is the single worst thing. It's like taking, Sri Kumar, one of the speakers, said that the second arrow, if you have an arrow shot in your arm, it hurts. Well, if you shoot a second arrow into that same spot, it hurts even more. We always shoot that second arrow. That notion of I'm the only one is that second arrow. So the minute you put them together with another person struggling, I love when something moves from a one-person problem to a team problem. The minute you have two or more, it's a team problem. Team problems are worth solving.
Like people will say, I can't do it, but they don't say we can't, right? I forget when we just,
Mackie said that.
Mackie said that.
Yeah.
Kids and just in general, kids or even adults will say, I can't do it. But it's really rare to hear saying, we can't do it. Imagine if I said, Charlie, we can't do this. That's a harder thing to say than I can't.
So bringing them together and coaching and helping them together versus think of how low performance reviews are done. Literally, you wait till everyone's gone so no one can see you, bring them in, right? End of the day, like, I mean, everything is done almost in hiding versus like you bring them together in at least two or more pairs. It helps them improve in the process by first removing that second arrow of thinking I am the only one. You end up removing that alone factor. The last point I want to make is this. The big challenge people have when it comes to improvement is dealing with where they think they should be. And things have changed. You're not there, but I should be here. I mean, we face this. The last 5 months of this pandemic, how many times we still do talk almost every week of where we should be. We should have moved into our new office, you know, sooner. We should have had this done. And you talk, I mean, the vacation I had planned, where we should be, like all the things that should have been, right? And that gap between where I think I should be right now and where I am is what creates frustration, right? How do I reset expectations? How do I reset saying, wait, it's like, it's a classic example. This is mostly for men, I think more than women, when we drive and get lost, right? I blew 25 minutes, right? I'm gonna find the shortcut. Forget about going back to the beginning. I'm gonna find the shortcut. We plodge on, right? Yeah. To find the shortcut. The idea of like resetting.
Going back
resetting and baselining to where is the starting point?
Yeah.
Where you actually are now, not where I should be. So when you're on the bottom, if they can get to acceptance, now here's the easier thing for them. When you're at the very bottom, it is easier to improve than when you're at the very top. The idea of trending, momentum. Momentum is easier when you're doing really bad than when you're doing really well. Going from good to great is that much harder than going from really bad to a little bit better. We have a poster in our office. It's called a bad +1 poster. It says something bad is easy to make better. Call it bad +1. So, you know, I think it says something bad is better than nothing. And then it says something bad is easy to make better. Call it the bad +1. If they can just accept where they are, it's easy to improve. And improvement, right, is the single most motivating factor. Trending, momentum. You know, like I feel so overweight, I feel not good. Oh my God, I lost a pound. Then if you lose another pound, you're like, whoa, there's momentum. It's amazing we get caught up in momentum. And that is more motivating than anything. Although we think great talks and speeches are motivational, it's momentum that we see on ourselves that motivates us more than anything else. Even if you put the bottom in pairs of at least 2, and it's like even better when you see the other, like, oh, Megan, you're getting better at math. Megan would be like, Charlie, you're getting better in your English writing. Like, and the combination of like that recognition of someone training with you, momentum, gets you out of your head, the sweaty palms. And once you start improving, it's a whole nother ballgame.
Yes, it's 12. So I know we're ending. I know if you have to leave, we could take a few more questions. I was just trying to look, the questions are all over the place too. I think we're teasing a little bit in terms of some of the answers and solutions to this and how to set up teams, and like all the things Charlie just said is, in theory, it might feel like I don't understand how we're going to do that. But
I blame, if you feel teased, I blame Megan, because I had a lot more slides I wanted to cover in a lot more depth. But you know, I think that might have like a brain aneurysm.
But I feel we could give it, a little bit more. But then I thought it might complicate things. But I feel like just hang in, right? Because next week we'll go through more in depth.
Think awareness though. I want you to go.
We want you to first spend the week thinking about this a little bit.
And go in depth. Yeah. Find the 2 seals that are on your boat. Find the 2 seals, find the instances, jot it down, like almost journal it. And when you start to see how many instances the seals are on your boat and how many times you're just like, it's amazing. Once you hear it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. And then you start to realize, how the hell are we operating with these two giant seals sitting on our boat, right? Trying to run a boat race.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow you convince yourself, I think we're moving at least, so it's good enough. As opposed to, you got to get the seals. You got to put the seals in a diet, right, to shrink them, or eventually get them off. But before you do, you have to recognize how many times the seals are showing up.
Mm. Yeah. As painful as that is, right?
Yeah.
It's just being aware. Let's marinate in this. Let's marinate in it, because then next week we can go into a lot more depth about the rituals, right? The weekly rituals, the battle rhythms, the programs that we have that develop self and then team, so you don't feel alone.
So
yeah.
like we're running this closed small group workshop at 3. It's 10 leaders. They're the heads of very, very amazing organizations across the board, from education to industry to the military. And we're covering with them one of the solutions, which is deep dive coaching. And so the elements of that, I think our thinking is to refine it, but then share it with this larger group. And then the other part is, if any of you are maybe interested, we're thinking, if you don't mind being part of the case study live, we could deep dive coach and try to help you in depth in front of this whole group. So that is something, I throw it out.
Who wants to train their judgment in front of others?
If you don't mind airing all your laundry and sharing it, like we will, use a live case study. And so we've been doing that in this small group. And we've covered military, we've covered charter school, we've covered, Fortune 500 company, but it's something that we could do, and it will show you the solution of how to better judgment.
This guy, Chris, is into it. Even Carla, I could see, is like,
Now, usually the military folks are like, yep, danger, put me
guys
right
are
there.
awesome.
Right?
This is why we love you people.
You probably find the what they call the industry, us pansy corporate types, we're like, I like to watch someone else go get fried a little bit while I learn some lessons. But yeah, so
not pansies, I can see like Jen
speaking,
is like,
I am one of those.
She's like, what the?
But so we'll give you really quick. Our email is Charlie@NextJump, and it's Megan with a GH at nextjump.com.
Megan with an H, MEGHAN.
I mean, instead of MEGAN. Charlie with an LIE, not a LEY, but spelled different ways. Tomato, tomato.
We should create a megachar at NextJump.
True.
Ooh.
New email address. Okay. We will make a new email address.
Chris is like, I like it.
It may work by later this afternoon.
Our kids like
Megachar at
Transformers, and somebody called us Megachar from the Air Force a long time ago, and it stuck.
Okay. And then someone flipped it and started calling us Charmeg, which sounds more like charbroiled or
It doesn't work.
like a blackened fish or something just doesn't, sounds burnt on the grill. Megachar versus Charmeg. But okay.
Thank you guys. It was good to see you all this week.
We would love your feedback.
Yeah.
I think you have the feedback apps. By the way, one of the solutions on crushing eggshells is the use of the feedback app. And what we shared last week is its built-in coaching system is to guide you of how to actually have voice, at a level of praise, but also being critical. Higher expectations of others in your team is the key root ingredient to get the whole team performing better. It's almost like everyone wants everyone else to do the work. Everyone needs to help someone and then I will show gratitude, as opposed to, no, you start by helping someone and then gratitude shows up for everybody. You start to give feedback, developmental feedback to other people, you will see, you will get it too. So there's a notion of kind of this cycle, which we can go through in one of our sessions future, but our way of saying, please use the app. It's built, so we shared it in the pandemic. So you can use it in your organizations with your teams as well. It's all free there. We will love your feedback as well.